We are recording the interview of Vance
Saunders.
This interview is being conducted by Jeremy Tack from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 9:20 a.m. 23rd of March 2018. Vance, thank you for being here. Let's start off with where and when were you born?
I was born in Zanesville, Ohio, which is 100 miles east of here, on the 21st of October, 1955.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
So Wayne Saunders was my dad. He was a civil engineer, graduate of the Ohio State University. My mother was Elizabeth Jean Saunders. She went by Jean, and she was a house mom, a wife and mother and all that kind of stuff. She did tons of stuff from a volunteer perspective, but past high school didn't have, and she went back and took some courses at night, but she was a mom.
Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have two older sisters and a younger brother.
Any of them serve in the military?
Did not.
Any other extended family or anything?
Well, Dad was in the Army Air Corps at the time, and then he was a Air Force reservist. Actually, Air Guard. Sorry, not reserves. Air Guard. And in fact, actually got to. We'll get to that, but got to commission me when that time came.
So, what did you do before joining the Air Force?
I was in high school.
So
I graduated from high school on the 7th of June of 1973, and I was in the Air Force on the 10th.
So what led to that decision?
I was actually sitting in the cafeteria at Zanesville High School taking either the ACT test or the SAT test, I don't remember which one, in January over winter break. And they're all timed tests, right? So I got done with one of the tests, and all of a sudden there was this, oh my golly, realization that I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. I was going to graduate in a few months, and I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. And I had taken a dog of mine through obedience school and done very, very, very well. And so had a desire from doing that to learn how to train dogs more. And that popped into my head for whatever reason as I'm sitting there in the cafeteria. And so, let's see, police have dogs and military have dogs. So I went and talked to the military, and through a whole litany of talking to the different services, I ended up enlisting in the Air Force to learn how to train dogs.
All right. Did you leave immediately, or was there a time in between?
3 days.
3 days?
Well, now, in January, no, I had to finish my senior year of high school. So they had a program back then called Delayed Enlistment Program. So I could enlist. I actually enlisted in the Air Force in January 1973, but I didn't actually start and didn't go to basic training until the 10th.
What did your parents think about this?
That's a very interesting discussion. My dad was for it. My mother was against it. There was quite an interesting family discussion, and eventually the papers were signed. I was only 17, so I had to have my parents' signature. But an amazing family story that's unrelated to this, but long story short, the papers got signed and I came in.
So tell me about basic training. What was that like?
Quite a shock. This is the 70s. I had long hair. And of course, that's the first thing that goes. And I was 17 years old. And if you had asked if you'd asked me, I would have told you that I knew everything, like most 17-year-olds think, okay? And recognize that you don't, and you get a rude awakening when you get there. And so it was pretty traumatic at first, and it didn't, it wasn't any more traumatic. Everybody, it's a shock for everybody, and it's intended to be a shock for everybody. And it was interesting. It was kind of at one point, and I don't remember where in the 6-week time frame, but our TI actually talked to us as human beings for one of the first times and said, "Why is it that you think that you have to fold your underwear in 3-inch squares and put it next to the wall, and if it's not there, and your bed has to be," and we do all this like really silly stuff. He says, "I realize that frustrates a lot of you, and you get written up if any of that's, not exactly right and all this kind of stuff. But he said, why do you think we do that? He asked the flight, and no one knew. And he said, so here's why. He goes, I have 6 weeks to take 40 people from every walk, race, religion, ethnic background, moral background, blah, 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 blah. I got 40, I don't know who you are or what you are, and I got 40 days to take you from wherever you came from and turn you into something that the Air Force can use. Mm-hmm. So I could have PhDs in that, and I could have way prior high school dropouts and everything in between. And so I have to have a way to judge you, and you all have to admit that a 5-year-old could do what you've been told to do, okay? There's a reason for that. 1, it's something that everybody can do, but 2, it also demonstrates to us whether you're willing to take orders and do what you're told and follow directions. And so there's all kinds of things, believe it or not. There was a lot of thought that goes into this basic training thing. It wasn't just to be mean to you and scare the living daylights out of you, okay? It's that we have to break any of this, I'm the boss, I'm going to do whatever the heck I want mindset, which could come from whoever, right? I can't give you college level exams, so I have to have a whole set of things to evaluate you and decide whether you have the potential to be a valuable member of the Air Force or not. And after, at least for me, after he explained that, it's like, wow, okay, this may not be as dumb, or at least I can put up with this and not be overly insulted anymore. Mm-hmm. But there was an aha moment. It's, oh, well, okay, so maybe somebody thought through a little bit of this after all. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other interesting experience, again, most of the people that were in my flight weren't 17. Most of them were a little bit older than that. A lot of them had, graduated from high school and gone off and done things for a little while and ended up in the military. But anyway, so after that, basic training wasn't bad, and then immediately from there, and of course this is all done at Lackland Air Force Base, and then immediately after basic training, because I had been accepted, so when I volunteered to be, or when I told the Air Force that I wanted to be a dog handler, the recruiter told me, he said, I can't guarantee you dog handling. That is called a special duty assignment. He says, the only people who get to be dog handlers are cops, security policemen in the Air Force. So he says, I can guarantee you can become a security policeman. That's one of the jobs that I can, if you pass the tests, and of course I didn't have any problem with any of that, you can be a security policeman. But he says, I can't guarantee that you'll get training. He says, you have to become a cop, and then they'll ask at some point in your security police training, anybody want to volunteer to be dog handlers, and you can volunteer, and then if you get picked, okay, and if you don't, not. So I knew that going in. But in any case, so I had to go through security police school. That was the next thing. So that was 6 weeks of that. And of course, having done that, like immediately after basic training. Basic training ended on, I don't know, we'll say Friday for the sake of conversation, on Monday, or maybe even that Sunday, it's off to, still right there at Lackland. So then there's 6 weeks of security police school, but now you're in tech school. Okay, so now you're a human being. Mm-hmm. Basic training, you're not human, just do what you're told, right? And again, I'm exaggerating to make a point. But it's completely different once you get to tech school, right? You have responsibility for your own schedule and how you live. And there's still dorm inspections. You can't be a total slob and stuff like this. But anyway, so we did that. I did that for 6 months, or 6 weeks. And then, as part of the process, I volunteered and got picked to go to be a military working dog handler, I think is the formal description. And that was an additional 12 weeks at Lackland. So I went down to Lackland on the 10th of June, and I didn't come home until right before Christmas. Wow. And then dog school was just a total blast. It was amazing. It was amazing.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, so the Air Force takes supposedly German Shepherds. They actually take them, they have to be 2 years old, I believe. And people from all over the country can send their dogs to the military for training. And I don't know what the exact criteria the military uses to select them. So then you're assigned a dog, And the process over that 12 weeks is they've got to train you, and they've got to train the dog. Now, in the the training that I went through was called patrol dog training. So there were two types of military working dogs in the military. There was one called the sentry dog program, which the Marines used, and which the Army used quite a bit during Vietnam. And a sentry dog is considered lethal force, deadly force. So basically, hold the dog in a, make the dog stay with you, but as soon as you tell the dog to go bite, it's allowed to rip you apart. Totally uncontrolled, that's what it's there for. The patrol dog program is what you see like with all the canines that go around with police and even military and stuff now, right? It's a controlled, they're not lethal force. It's a controlled bite. They're taught to bite you only on the arm and nowhere else. They're taught to release the bite when they're told not to. So their whole goal is to like apprehend somebody and not really hurt them much at all, actually. So this was a patrol dog program. Again, the sentry dog program doesn't exist anywhere in the military. It hasn't for years. Pretty much died with Vietnam. Okay. So patrol dog program and teaching. So it's teaching the dogs. There's a lot of work. You have to get the dog to be aggressive, but this is controlled aggressiveness. Okay. And then you have to teach the handler. Okay. So it was a lot of fun. The thing that we used one of the things I remember the most. So then in the military working dog program, then there was a specialty inside of that for drug dogs and bomb dogs. So there's the normal patrol dogs, like the German Shepherds that you see with the police, okay? But then the drug dog program, especially in the Air Force, okay, one of the things that they had to have the dogs go sniff was cockpits of airplanes. German Shepherds, 80-pound or 100-pound animals that are 6 feet when they stand up, that doesn't work very well. And so we had little teeny dogs, and it was so funny to watch. You'd watch a flight of my guys, adults with their big adult dogs, go walk by. And then sometimes you'd pass the drug dog class, and here's all these great big guys, and you can barely see whatever's walking next to them. I mean, we laughed at them a lot, but there was a reason for that, to set them up into a cockpit. But anyway, so it was a total blast.
Go ahead.
Well, and then after I graduated, then my first duty assignment was to Columbus, Ohio, to what was then called Lockbourne Air Force Base, which then got renamed to Rickenbacker Air Force Base, which then got closed down. Blah, blah, blah. But anyway, yeah, so I left San Antonio in December, and my duty assignment was Columbus, Ohio.
At any point in time during training, did you visit your parents? You come back home?
My parents came down to visit me. At the end of basic training, before I started tech school, or maybe the first couple weeks I was in tech school, they actually drove a car down to me so that I had a car the rest of the time I was down there. So they came and visited. Then it's during the summer, so we did June, July, so in the August time frame probably. And then went back home, and then I got almost a month off from the time I left dog school over the Christmas holiday that year before I had to report to duty in Columbus. But so they came and visited. Mom and Dad came and visited once, and that was it.
And Columbus is pretty close to
50 miles. Less than. I mean, Columbus is it's 50 miles from Zanesville.
So tell me about that first duty station. What was that like? What would you do there?
Well, so then the advantage of dogs see better than we do, hear better than we do, and smell better than we do. Their nose is the biggest. I'm not going to remember the numbers exactly, but I think a dog's nose is like 200x better than ours or something like that. And their hearing, anyway, and their eyesight too, are all better. Not that better, but better. Anyway, so the idea is that patrol dogs are used to well, there's two types. One, the ride around law enforcement, ride around in police cars like we used to them. Most of those, though, are drug dog assignments. So in the Air Force at the time, we had two branches of the police force. There was what we called law enforcement, which is what you would view as a traditional cop. Mm-hmm. They rode around in the cars with the lights. They were in your barracks, in the living areas. Okay, they were your typical cops. They showed up for burglar alarms. They showed up for disputes, and that's called law enforcement. And they didn't know in all the assignments that I had, none of the law enforcement people had dogs. Mm-hmm. Then there was the security forces, which is, so you had law enforcement and security. Security was responsible for protecting the Air Force assets, mm-hmm. which in most cases were airplanes or bombs or other types of weapons. And then because you had a dog, you were on the perimeter because a dog can smell so well. Mm-hmm. So if they're smelling 200 times better than me, the idea is that if some bad guy is trying to sneak up on the perimeter of an area that contains airplanes or whatever, weapons of some type, valuable property, whatever it is, doesn't have, your dog's going to alert on it and detect on it long before you're ever going to see it, hear it, or anything else. Mm-hmm. Now again, 70s, we don't have all the sensors and we don't have unmanned quadcopters to fly around and a whole bunch of stuff that we have now, okay? We walked the perimeters of the areas the controlled areas or secured areas that our airplanes were stored or were parked in. And some of those airplanes had nuclear weapons on them, and that gets even, so that was the job. So we were on the perimeter with our dog, and basically you just walked around the perimeter, and it was a boring job as far as, but you want it to be boring actually, because if it gets unboring, it's not so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Did your dog ever detect anything there, or?
Not at Rickenbacker. The most excitement that we had at Rickenbacker, there's a public road right outside of where the flight line was at Rickenbacker, and there were houses on the other side of that road. And one time when I was actually on duty the night this happened, we got a call from someone else that said they had shots fired coming into the area that had F-111s with nuclear weapons on them. Mm-hmm. Naturally, that gets people's attention. And so the whole place went berserk. And long story short, it turned out that a couple of the guys across the street decided that they were going to throw pop cans up in the air and shoot at them with their shotguns. Mm-hmm. And they happened to be pointed right towards the base, which was right across the street. Mm-hmm. And either they weren't good shots or they shot more or whatever else, and some of that stuff came into our secured area. But it was a major event because the shots were fired. No one knew whether they might have hit the airplanes or not. So all the pilots had to come out. They had to, and the maintenance guys, you had to fire up all the airplanes. You had to check them all out, make sure that there hadn't been any damage done to anything. I mean, that little event cost the American taxpayers a bunch of money. Mm-hmm. Justifiably so. Those airplanes are sitting on alert to protect us, so don't get me wrong. But that's how it eventually turned out. But trust me, there was a ton of excitement that night. So then the next assignment after Rickenbacker was I got an assignment to Germany, to a place called Hahn Air Base. And we had probably the most fun I ever had with a dog there was one of the things that you trained your dog to do was to allow you to search a bad guy. Mm-hmm. So if you apprehended a bad guy, then you had to search him to take any weapons he might have or anything like that. And so your dog was trained to sit 10 paces out in front of you and sit there. Mm-hmm. And if the bad guy did anything to you, then the dog was going to automatically attack the bad guy. Mm-hmm. And we were having an exercise at Hahn, and there was an event called a block and tackle, which is a fancy where it says that what it means in the Air Force is that someone's trying to steal an airplane. Mm-hmm. Now, and so there was this block and tackle, but this was not an exercise. This was, when it came across, this was a real block and tackle. What that means, or what ended up happening, is there are 3 different organizations that have to all agree that Jeremy is supposed to be in that airplane doing this on this day. 3 different organizations. And if any one of those don't agree, if I have it down that Vance is supposed to be there and somebody else says Jeremy, now we got a problem. So there was to preface this, there was a mix-up in all this. So this wasn't really somebody trying to steal the airplane, but this communication breakdown happened, and so this was a real thing. It didn't match up. So you have to stop the airplanes, you have to pull the pilots out, and you have to search them. Okay, that's all. And the cops, so the reason it's called block and tackle is the security police force has to take their truck and pull it in front of a big old honking airplane that's taxiing down the runway and block it, and then make the pilots get out. These are F-4s that these guys were flying over at Han at the time. And then you have to make the pilots get out and all that kind of stuff. And so I was riding with one of these SAT teams, they were called. What was SAT team? What does SAT stand for? I don't remember. Security Alert Team, maybe? I don't know. Anyway. And we blocked this plane, and the pilot got out. And so he's in his bag, and he's standing there with his arms up and everything. And my dog's name was Racker. And he's sitting there. And if you've seen flight suits, they have zipper pockets all over them. And so this pilot spread-eagled, standing up, and I'm in the process of searching him, and I have to remove his weapons, and they all have survival knives tied to a bunch of nylon cord tucked down in one of their zipper pockets. Well, that's a weapon, and part of my job is I have to remove the weapons. So I'm paying attention to taking this knife off, and the pilot's not saying anything, but all of a sudden I notice that the pilot's legs, he just starts shaking. And I turn around and look, and Racker had stayed seated, had just creeped up and creeped up and creeped up, and his nose was like right. I should have felt him breathing in my ear. He was that close. And the pilot, he didn't say a word, but here's this dog inching closer and closer and closer. And when we were all done, the pilot came up and he said, "Sergeant Saunders, you do a very thorough search and investigation." But anyway.
So how long were you there in Germany?
The first time,
that
2 years. An awesome place. My wife came over. We got married there. Our oldest daughter was born there. So yeah, I got there in February of 75. Yeah, because I was at 74 was at Rickenbacker. 75 to 77.
Where did you meet your wife?
Hometown. When I was at Rickenbacker, I kept going back to Zanesville all the time and met her there.
So what was after Germany then?
Okay, came back. So while we were over there, the security police field there's a thing in the Air Force that allows you to cross-train. It's called cross-training, where you can choose to change jobs. And the security police field, because it was so hard to keep enough security police people around, had never been opened up for cross-training. So there was never an opportunity for that. And we were standing in what's called guard mount one day, which is the formation that you have before you go out to duty every day. And our flight chief mentioned just briefly in reading through the op memos that the 811 and 811 or 8115, which was security, 811, 812, and 811A. So 812 is law enforcement, 811 is security, 811A is K9. We're eligible for cross-training. That's all he said. And I heard that, and I said, "Wait a minute, read that again, please." And he did. And so the next day, I went over and to CBPO, the personnel office, to apply for cross-training. And the reason for it wasn't, I love training dogs. But I told you that the duty assignment with dogs is out there on the perimeter. Okay? There aren't air-conditioned or heated buildings that you sit in out there on the perimeter. Okay? And so you freeze, and you get wet, and you deal with the elements because that's what you're out there for. And I was tired of that. Okay? I was jealous of the people that had this cushy office job. They could go get a cup of coffee whenever they wanted. They could go to the bathroom whenever they wanted, and you can't do anything out there. You have to call up and have someone come relieve you, and they had to take your post, and it's a big hassle to go do all that. So after doing 4 years of the dog stuff, well, 2 years of the dog stuff, I was ready to get inside. That was my desire. And so I went down and applied to cross-train, and of the things that were open, I applied for something called a command post operator. I got accepted. So when I came back from Germany, I went to Keesler Air Force Base for retraining to learn how to become a command post operations specialist. And then after I went through that, that was 5 or 6 weeks. Then we got stationed back at Lackland Air Force Base. Okay, so I was actually there. We lived there, and our twins were born there. And I did that worked in the command post for 2 years. And then I got orders back to Germany, this time to Stuttgart, Germany, and this time as an ops specialist in something called an ASOC, an Air Support Operations Center. And that's the Air Force living with the Army and providing the Army with close air support in times of war. So we actually were stationed at Kelly Barracks with 7th Corps headquarters in Meiringen, Germany, which is Stuttgart, outside Stuttgart, and lived on the other side of Stuttgart. And so we were there for, well, let's see, 70, when did I go over there? Came back 75, 77, 78 to 81. Yeah. Yes. And then while I was in Stuttgart, I had been taking college classes for quite a while. And I got a note from my commander about a program called the Airman Education and Commissioning Program. Special program inside the military. It's to take enlisted military members, or at least Air Force. I can't speak for the other branches of the service. And basically, if they're selected, to give them a scholarship in very selected fields that the Air Force had a really hard time getting college graduates to come be officers. And those areas were then, and still continue to be, computer science, physics, engineering, and I think weather, maybe. And there was a whole set of criteria that you had to have to be qualified. You had to have had a certain amount of college credit already and other things. Anyway, long story short, applied for that, got accepted. So my assignment leaving Stuttgart was to Wright State. And I came back here in 1982, was here from 82 to 84, and got my bachelor's degree in computer science. And then from there, went to Lackland again, this time to get commissioned. So I've seen Lackland Air Force Base everywhere you can see it. Basic training, permanent party, tech school, officer training school. That's everything they do. So got commissioned, and then we got our assignment. First assignment was to Omaha, Nebraska, to Strategic Air Command. That's the headquarters for what was then called Strategic Air Command. That's now just Strategic Command now. But in any case, so we were in Omaha for 3 years. And while we were out there, I applied for and got accepted to come to get my master's degree. So I came back to Wright State. I was here from 88 to 89. Got my master's degree in computer science. And then I got stationed at the Air Force Research Lab. So we stayed here in Dayton. So we came back to Dayton in 1988, and we haven't left. Because in 1993, a lot of things had changed in the Air Force, and it didn't look like I was going to be able to achieve some of the objectives that I had based on those changes. And because of the job I had at the research lab, I had interfaced with all kinds of contractors. And so it was an opportune time in the 92, 93, 94 time frame. The military was in a huge force reduction mode, and they were letting people out of the Air Force for just about any reason that they wanted. And they changed the requirement. There had originally been a requirement that said in order to retire as an officer, you had to serve at least 10 years as an officer. And in 1993, I'd only served 8 years. But they changed the rules and said, okay, if you had 8 years, you could retire as an officer. And so it all just kind of fell in place. And so I retired from the Air Force in 93. And then I went to work for Ball Aerospace and Technologies Corporation, which is right across the street, defense contractor. And then I did that for the next 20 years.
Let's go back and talk about command post operator. Was that what's basically their responsibilities?
So the command post is the operations center, 24/7 operations center for the commander of the base. So they're the ones. So every base has a mission of some type that it fulfills in the event that we have to go to war, in the event of natural disasters, and all this kind of stuff. And the command post is the hub. So when the commander goes to bed at night, he calls up whoever's on the command post and says, "Good night. Don't wake me unless the world know." I mean, there's a whole set of then rules, but this is the center where everything with respect to what goes on at the base is centered at. So with respect to the overall mission of that base, and so we worked in shifts. So you worked. I mean, it was a 24/7 job. We worked 12-hour shifts actually, and you were the commander's representative. And so you had a whole, depending on what all happened, there were all these checklists, and you had banks of phones that connected you directly to fire department and police and just all kinds of things. And so that you were basically an operations center, coordinated everything that went on in the overall perspective of what was going on with the base. And so there were certain things that you didn't have to wake the commander up for. Again, all done by checklist. This wasn't something you just decided yourself. Okay. You had an officer that was a junior officer that was there with you. Enlisted people were the ones that actually ran the console, as we called it. You had an officer there that was technically the commander's designated representative, and that was just a special duty assignment for them, so they rotated. But that was your job, and so it was a job that was boring a whole lot of time and absolutely nuts the rest of the time. I mean, we were able to smoke back then. I mean, and you knew that you had a busy day when you had a cigarette burning in each of the 4 or 5 ashtrays that were laying up there on the console. But anyway, yeah.
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I loved it. And the work that we did the same work. We went to the ASOC. It was similar work. Again, operations coordination, but in a much different fashion, because now we were providing close air support. You had to deploy with the Army, and so we had all these 2.5 and 5-ton trucks that had expandable walls. And so when you deployed, there was a big long convoy, and then all these walls expanded, and you backed them all up, and you created this command post, out of all these trucks, and you had to cover them all up so there was no light shining and all this kind of stuff. And of course, we had radios all over the place because that's how we communicated. But then the ASOC, there were probably 120 of us total, because you were totally, you had to provide your own food, you had to provide your own fuel, you had to provide, you were a completely self-contained thing. So it was a different job, but it was still a whole lot of fun. And so we did that, and then when you were in garrison, then there were other responses. You had to be, we were called a geographically separated unit. So our headquarters was Sembach Air Force Base, which was 120 some miles north of Stuttgart. And so we lived with the Army. You had to do certain things that the Army did. You had to do certain things that the Air Force did. But looking back on it, it was, we loved all of our assignments. And when I say we, my wife was with us or with me and the kids, and we loved moving around and going to different places. So, yeah. It was a good, but it was a different assignment. But yeah, I loved being command post. It was a lot of fun.
And there, you mentioned deployment. Did you deploy you from Stuttgart or?
Yes.
Or, yeah. And where would you go?
Out in the field, and for exercises, I don't know, we'd go. I don't know how many times a year, several, and then the big exercises that people, reforger exercises and things that people in the military are familiar with. You practice. Back that time, we were still worried about the Russians coming across the Fulda Gap and things like that. And so it was an interesting environment. It was I never forget. It was a wake-up call when I first got there, because I went to Germany first, and then Christine and the kids came over later. And when you first signed up, or when you first got there, they sent you through this whole briefing that said, okay, you're in a position and you're in an area where if we go do our job, that means the bad guys are right there. It's not like being in the States, where maybe the bad guys will get to you eventually. Okay, when I'm protecting the perimeter at Rickenbacker Air Force Base, there's a whole lot of work for bad guys to get to me there. In Germany, that's not the case. Fulda Gap's just up the road. Well, it was up anyway. And so they told you, they said, if you ever deployed for real, non-exercise deployment, okay, this was kiss your family goodbye. They had to get on an airplane. They would have been put on. You had a whole set of plans, and I can't remember what it was called. That your loved ones knew if you got called on short notice because you were gone. You had no opportunity to help pack them up or anything. The horn goes off and you're gone, and then they knew that they had a certain amount of time to pack up stuff, and they knew where they had to go, and they had a whole set of their passport. There was a whole package that you had to keep available, so that in the event that you ever needed it. Now, praise the Lord, we never had to use that. You practiced it a couple times, but we never had to use it. But it was a whole lot different environment there than it was back in the States. And I need to take a break, please.
Oh, yes. This time we'll be taking a break from the interview.
Thanks.
We are resuming the interview of Vance Saunders. This interview is being conducted by Jeremy Tack from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is now 10 o'clock on the 23rd of March, 2018. All right, so we were talking about command
post stuff.
Command post stuff, right?
Sure.
And then after that, you commissioned.
That's right. After when I came back from Germany, so I had two assignments in the command post. The one at Lackland, and then the one over in Germany. And then yes, while I was over there, and there was quite a bit. It was quite an amazing set of events had to take place. So Stuttgart, below Stuttgart, is a town called Augsburg. And so having been a security policeman, I had taken quite a bit of criminal justice courses part-time prior to being over in Germany. So now this opportunity for this AECP thing, I mean, this is for technical degrees, right? Computer science and engineering, computer science, and physics, for all intent and purposes. And you had to have to apply for the scholarship. You had to have 2 semesters of calculus and you had to have calculus and physics, and I didn't have either one of them. And oh, by the way, in order to take calculus, you have to have trig, and I hadn't had trig either. And so it was interesting. The education advisor. So in Stuttgart, there are Patch Barracks, which is UCOM headquarters. That's an Air Force base. Is not too far from Kelly Barracks, and then there's all kinds of Army in the Stuttgart area. And so so a lot of the military services serve everybody, not just Kelly Barracks or not just Patch, but so there was an education coordinator for the Stuttgart area, and there were a couple of us that had expressed interest in this AECP thing, but we weren't qualified. And so she was aware of some students in Augsburg, which is 100 miles south of Stuttgart, that also wanted to do the same thing, but they weren't qualified either. So the education coordination between Stuttgart and Augsburg, they created a special trigonometry class that was offered on Saturdays that, there were probably, 15 of us. But I was the only one from Stuttgart. So every Saturday morning for, I don't know, 10, 12 weeks, I don't know how long it was, I would drive the 100 miles down to Augsburg and sit through, I don't know, 6, 7 hours of class, and then drive back to get the trig class to be eligible to then go to something called a Math Physics Institute, which was also a special thing up at Ramstein, which is about 100 miles north of Stuttgart. And you went there, and that was a temporary duty. I mean, I stayed up there all week and did nothing but take calculus courses for, so we did 2 semesters of calculus in, I don't know, 12 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that. And then would go home on the weekends, or anyway. So there was a whole lot of work necessary to get me qualified to be able to apply. And then after you get all that done, then you put in the application, and then I got selected. And so then you go through the process of picking where you wanted to go. And it was interesting. You had to go to a university that had an Air Force ROTC detachment. That was the one requirement. Well, of course, they had to offer your degree program, but silly that, okay? But it had to have a ROTC detachment, because as a full-time student, you kind of reported in. That was the closest military unit that you would have to report into every once in a while. And so originally, with respect to the computer science area that I wanted to go into, Akron was the only university, when I first looked, Akron was the only one that had an ROTC detachment. I don't know, maybe Ohio State did, but I didn't want to go to a great big school. I'm not even sure Ohio State was on the list. Regardless, Akron was there. I'd never even heard of Wright State. And when I finally got done and looked at the list, and there was this Wright State, and it was in Dayton, Ohio, I said, oh, that sounds cool. And so they had an Air Force, they got put on the list, and so I selected Wright State and came back here in '82. And then it was kind of a no-brainer to come back here and get my master's degree. Because, again, great school and great program in computer science. So, but, yeah, so that's how I ended up. We ended up coming back here from doing the ops stuff. And then, then I got commissioned, and then I played computer scientist for a while in the Air Force.
Tell me about officer training school.
A total blast. Again, and this is continuing to support a stereotype, but it does a pretty good job of describing it. So you can remember the movie An Officer and a Gentleman? So in basic training, you're not human. Okay, again, that's a huge overstatement simply to make a point. Okay, you are treated as a gentleman in officer training school. Yes, you have sort of, it's night and day. It's totally, especially having gone through basic training. Now, for a whole lot of students who just completed college, who went down to officer training school, it was a shock of a lifetime. Okay, similar to the shock that I experienced when I went to basic training right out of high school. But for those of us, we were called prior enlisted students, or candidates, we'd already been through basic training. And let me tell you, officer training school was a party because of the way you were treated. It was amazing. Now, yeah, you still had inspections, you still had a bunch of rules to follow, but we all knew what those were for. And it's just night and day difference. And we already understood why we were having to do all this silly stuff. So we didn't have to go through, again, all of these young men and women right out of college, they're told they have to eat square meals and you have to walk the line, and that doesn't sit well with most of them. And this is just totally stupid. And why am I having to do this? And it's like, get over it. It's nothing. So it was a whole lot of fun. And we had a blast. I had a total blast.
And how long was that school?
What was it, 12 weeks maybe? And then the thing that was really cool about that, so I graduated, when you're on an AECP scholarship, you have to go to school whenever school's in session. So I had to take summer school here, full term, the C term kind of thing. So, but that meant that that we had, when school was not in session, we got to goof off like everybody else. Anyway, so I finished my last course and graduated the summer of 88 to 80, no, undergraduate, 84. Okay, and so then went to OTS, and was an OTS basically, yeah, it was 12 weeks, September, October, and November, okay? So then graduation time comes, and so then my family and my mom and dad, I mean, it was a big deal. We had all kinds of people come down, but the thing that was really cool was you have to be commissioned by an officer, and so my dad got to commission me as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. It was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, he came, so they all came down for that.
And then what was the next duty station after that?
Strategic Air Command, Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay. And what did you do then?
Worked in, what were we called at the time? Strategic Communication Division, SCD. So our headquarters, wow, so we were in the headquarters building. The group that I worked for was responsible for maintaining the Force Management Information System database, which was the database that had all of the information about all of our nuclear weapons and all that kind of stuff, that was then, that the seniors made decisions off of. And so all of the, again, all the status of the nukes, all the status of the crews, because you have, you know, nuclear weapons, you have missiles, you have bombs, right? And so, and there were, remember, there were two organizations that had that. The Navy, because you had sub-launched missiles, and then you had land-based missiles like Minot, you were talking about Minot, okay? And then you had the bombers, okay? All that information, aircraft status, missile status, crews on alert, crews, I mean, all that stuff was put in this database. And we were responsible for maintaining it. Now, the exciting part about that, two things that went on while I was there. The first one, from a technology perspective, these things called relational databases. You've heard of Oracle? Are you a techie at all?
No.
Okay, anyway, for those that will hear this in our relational databases is the standard database that's out there that everybody uses now. Access, if you do Windows stuff, anyway, is a relational database. Well, back in, so where are we at? We're in Omaha, so this is 84, well, actually, we didn't get there to January of 85 since I didn't graduate till December. So January of 85 to, 87, because 87, 88 back here, anyway, relational databases didn't exist. And the FMIS, as the Force Management Information System, FMIS, this database thing, had been built on a different type of technology because relational databases didn't exist, a whole bunch of link overlaid tables. So one of the jobs that the group that I was assigned with was to convert that system to this new modern technology. And that was a very interesting, it was a very fun project. It was a special access project. And then the other thing, well, two other things that happened. Then the communication infrastructure that all of the SAC bases all over the United States, where the bombers and the missiles and everything were, all those, the communication infrastructure that they used to report their status back to the headquarters, which is where we were at, got upgraded. It got digitized, and so then there was a group of people. The system was called SACDIN, SAC's Digital Network, Digital Information Network. Anyway, there was a group that handled developing that software, but then that software interfaced with our database. I mean, that's how all the information eventually got into our database. So the interface between that new system and our database had to get worked, and that was a huge issue. There were a lot of long hours put in to finally get that whole thing to work. A lot of fun, and we were eventually successful, but a whole lot of work involved with that. And then the last thing that I did before I left to come back here to go to school, was the first rendition of the new SAC command post, which is now gone through another. There's a new SAC command post, but at the time we had the old SAC command post, and people have seen the pictures with all the big. If you've watched War Games, the movie War Games, and they got the big, huge honking screens, and anyway, when that got upgraded, the display capabilities had, again, a technology improvement, had also improved dramatically, and so the colonel that was in charge of the upgrade of the command post, somewhere when whoever had laid out all of the requirements for that command post had failed to include anything to upgrade the displays themselves. They were putting in all this other really cool stuff, and they were making the command post smaller and doing all this stuff, but the actual taking advantage of what we would even laugh at as graphics back today, given all of our 3D whole stuff. Back then, the next advancement in graphics compared to what we had hadn't been included, and he wasn't going to put that old stuff in his new command post. So he created what we called a lion team. Have you ever heard of a tiger team?
No, I've not.
Tiger teams, the industry uses tiger teams too. Tiger teams are, I have an immediate need to fix something, and I grab a bunch of people, literally take them from wherever their jobs are, form this special team, they go solve the problem, but then they dissolve and they go back to where they came from. That's a tiger team. People create tiger teams all the time. We called ourselves a lion team because we were brought together to solve a problem, but then we weren't going to dissolve afterward. We were going to stick around and take care of manage the system after we built it. It was an amazingly fun project because my job, I was in charge of the interface group, so I got to go around to all of the senior officers that were part of the general, the 4-star general that ran SAC, the SAC commander. I went to all of his staff and basically said, okay, right now, for the sake of discussion, you get this line-by-line display of information, basically like a Word document. And now I'm going to bring you all this wild and crazy graphics stuff. What are you going to do with it? And of course, the answers were, I don't have a clue. Everything that I have, what I have right now is just fine. Leave me alone. Okay. To, I don't have a clue, but it sounds interesting. To some of the guys, it said, wow, this is really cool. Let's try this. Okay. And everywhere in between. So you'd go in, and here I am. I'm a, what? First lieutenant, because I didn't make captain until I came back here, right? Yeah. So I'm a first lieutenant, interfacing with colonels and 1-star generals and 2-star generals. But basically sitting down with them and saying, okay, here's a picture of what you got right now. Here are some examples of what I can do for you with this new system. What do you want? And again, then all the, some of them would kick me out of the office. They didn't have enough time to, it was amazing. It was a lot of fun. But unfortunately, they actually did get the system built and implemented. I didn't get to see that happen because I got transferred back to start school before the project actually finished. But that was a blast. That was a really fun project. We got pulled out of our jobs. We got put over in a special building, and we were quite a crew.
And then you said after that, then you came back to Wright State for your master's?
Came back and got my master's degree.
Master's degree in
computer science.
Computer science.
Yep.
And then here at Wright Pat.
I went to the Air Force Research Lab. Yeah, my thesis advisor. So back in that time frame, so this is 88 and 89. There was a programming language called ADA, that had been mandated as the programming language to be used for all of the military's software systems. And so my thesis advisor, her name was Dr. Verlinda Dobbs. She's not here anymore, but during the summer, the Air Force Research Lab hires a lot of our faculty members to go over there and work over the summer and do research on special things. And she had done that a couple different times. And so the work that I did as a master's student was on explanation generations of expert systems. And Dr. Dobbs knew of an organization and a man named Bill McQuay that had interest. That's who she was doing her research with, and she actually felt that the stuff I was doing would be of interest to him, and so she actually connected us. And I went over and I met Mr. McQuay at the lab the December of my first year. So I got here in June of '88, and then left in December. It took me a year and a half to get my master's degree. So in December of '88, I went over and interviewed with Mr. McQuay and told him what I was doing and what I was working on, that kind of stuff. And he actually put in a by name request for me, such that I already knew where I was going to be stationed. A whole lot of other people didn't know where they were going to go until they graduated. I knew exactly where I was going to go when I graduated because he put in a request and they approved it. And so I knew in early '89 that I was going to go work for him when I got done at the end of December. And so that's what happened, and that's how I went over to the research lab and was there then from, I actually reported in December of '89, and then was there until June of '93 when I got out.
And what would you work on there?
A bunch of different things. Probably the funnest thing that we worked on. So modeling and simulation is a really big deal, and the Air Force the military, not just the Air Force, had defined a 3-tiered structure for doing modeling and simulation to cover war game modeling and simulation, training modeling and simulation, and engineering level modeling and simulation. And it was called JWARS, JSIMS, and JMAS. JWARS, Joint War. I don't remember the exact acronym, but anyway, this was the warfighters, and the difference between these, at the warfighter level, the generals want to know very quickly who's going to win the war, and they don't care about any of the technical detail. They're assuming the technical detail's there, but the models that they want to run very quickly and give them an answer. Okay, when I move my troops here and deploy here, and I'm going to use up this many bombs and bullets and all this kind of stuff, and what's the results? So there's the level of fidelity or technical detail that's required is not real high because they want very quick general answers. Training level modeling and simulation, now you have to get very representative of what you're training on. So flight simulators for airplanes to teach pilots how to fly and all that kind of stuff fell into that category. And then the engineering level simulation, that's the technical details that feed into the stuff. Okay, so science makes a big deal in engineering level simulations. Bullets have to fly the way bullets fly, with respect to speed, and I mean all the natural effects that affect everything. And so it's a very detailed, very computationally intensive environment, as opposed to this one up here that's just quick and dirty. Does that make? Are you with me?
Yeah.
So I was the Air Force technical lead for the Joint Modeling and Simulation System, working with Bill McQuay, that we laid out I created a Tiger team of contractors and a couple other military people, and we actually went off base and had 6 months probably it took us to design this architecture and everything that was necessary to create a joint modeling and simulation system, that's what JMAS stood for, at the engineering level, that was then the backbone for engineering, modeling, and simulation across the military at the time. And that was a fun project. A lot of interface with all kinds of contractors and a lot of fun technical work. The design team was an absolute blast. Some minds that just, I mean, I was humbled daily by some of the people that were part of my Tiger team that came up with all this kind of stuff. And the thing that is even more interesting is that some of the things we talked about back then, and back then we're talking about 1990, 91 time frame, because 90, 91 time frame. And the stuff we talked about back then, some of the guys that were part of this team, too, in particular, were very forward-thinking guys. And as we were wrestling through some of the challenges that we had to put this system together, and one of the biggest ones was just how detailed is enough. This is engineering level. Some people believe that if I'm supposed to create a simulation of you, that unless I do the synapses in your brain and the blood vessels in your arms and legs and every nerve, and I mean, then it's not an accurate model. Okay, that level of detail. Others will argue, no, I don't have to do the synapses in your brain. I can collectively not have to do every one of them, but just have a more general simulation that is representative of the way you think. Okay? But there's this argument, because one, people know if you don't model it down to the synapse, then it's not Jeremy.
Yeah.
Okay? And the other one says, but yeah, it is, because what I'm going to use Jeremy for, I can ask him all these questions. Jeremy can give me all the answers. I can make that thing give those same answers, and it's the same deal. And so you have this fidelity argument about, am I going to believe the information that comes out of your simulation? I mean, as silly as it kind of sounds, it's really a legitimate argument.
Yeah.
Okay, and of course, if I'm going to model all your synapses, that takes a whole lot more processing and more time. And anyway, so we used to go through all those discussions as part of laying out this architecture. And a couple of the guys talked about some of the things that we're starting to see come to fruition now because of all the advances in technology. And as a technologist who's lived through all that, to see what they talked about and to then go back and appreciate. We didn't appreciate, well, I didn't appreciate as much how forward-thinking they really were, because then you get to see it when you see it come to fruition, it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, so that was a lot of fun. So I did that. That was the JMAS. The JMAS work was the major thing that I worked on. I had a heck of a cultural shock when I got to the lab. All of the assignments that I had in the Air Force, except for school, had been operational assignments. Meaning I was with an operational unit, a unit that had well, everybody has a wartime mission, but it had a wartime mission and all this kind of stuff. And the acquisition world and the research world, which is what Wright Pat is all about, right? Wright Pat has the research lab, and then it has Air Force systems. Well, they're not systems. The Air Force, or the what's it called? Life Cycle Management, Air Force Life Cycle Management Center, or whatever, AFLCMC. Anyway, the organization is responsible for building and maintaining all of our weapon systems, right? And then you got the whole logistics side of the fence over at the other piece of the Air Force Materiel Command. Okay, so it's none of this is fly airplanes, drop bombs, or any of that kind of stuff, which is where I had come from my entire career. And so anytime you go to a new job, the acronyms are all different, the stuff is all different. And so I never forget, so in an operational Air Force unit, in the enlisted level, you have somebody called a first sergeant. And the first sergeant is the head NCO of the enlisted people, okay? And as an officer, especially having been an enlisted person, okay, that's the first sergeant is one of the most influential and most knowledgeable people in any unit. He or she just is. They know what's going on with all the enlisted people. They know how to get everything done. Anyway, so as a smart officer, you always establish a good relationship with your first sergeant, because that person is going to do more, make or break you in the context of what you're going to try to get done, okay? So I come to Wright Pat, and my very first day I walk in, and we were allowed to call them secretaries back then. You know, we can't call them secretaries anymore, but they were secretaries back then. And I looked at her first name was Kathy, and this was Bill McQuay's secretary. And I said, so who's the first shirt of this organization? First shirt is the slang term for first sergeant. So who's the first shirt of this organization? And I got a blank stare coming back. And I thought to myself, oh, well, I'm using slang, and she doesn't understand the slang. So I said, no, I was sorry about that. Who's the first sergeant in this organization? And her expression didn't change. And I went, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? And it's just the acquisition world I mean, they were throwing all these acronyms around. I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. I didn't know anything about contracts. I didn't know anything about relationships with contractors, and oh my gosh. And so it was quite a cultural shock when I first got here. And of course, in operational units, the relationship of active duty military to civilian, there's a whole bunch of active duty people and not a whole lot of civilians. And that role here at Wright Pat is completely reversed. There's way more civilians than there are military people, and so, and that's not bad. It was just totally different. So it took a little bit to get used to that and to recognize. And I'll tell you a cute story here in a second. To recognize that the what's the word? The management leadership style that you use in an operational unit wasn't going to work in a Wright Pat environment. Okay, in an operational unit, whoever is the superior in rank person given the responsibility, they say jump, you say how high and how many bags full, and that's the end of the conversation. I mean, that's again overstating it, but that's the way it is. Okay. And so rank and appreciation for, respect for rank and all that kind of stuff is very, and it's critical. There's a legitimate reason for all that, although one can argue that we take it overboard. But anyway, so the way that I learned, and again, my mentor was Bill McQuaid to help me transition from that operational environment to this. So I had to go on a trip at the lab shortly after I'd gotten there, and it was a short notice trip. You're supposed to, in the process for travel within the lab required, I don't know, 2 weeks ahead of time, some amount of time you had to submit things and everything else. And so when this trip came up, I was going to have to hand walk the paperwork through to get the orders to allow me to go travel. And the travel organization for AFRL was at another building over on the base. And so I'm getting ready to go walk this paperwork through, and Bill calls me into the office, and he reaches into his desk, and he pulls out a little porcelain windmill. And he says, here, take this with you, okay, and then give it to the ladies that you're going to go talk to get your orders through. And I looked at him and I said, what the heck do I need that for? Their frickin' job is to get my stuff done. I'm going down there, hand them the paperwork, and say, get it done. What do I need this silly little windmill for? And Bill sat there and listened to this inexperienced captain, and he said, do you want to get your orders done, or do you want to fall on your sword? Okay. And I said, I want my orders. He says, take the windmill and give it to the ladies. And I was struggling with it. I really was. I said, I should not have to bribe somebody. Dang it. That's your job. Do your job. Okay? But I took it, and I went down there and was smart enough to be polite about it and everything when I finally got there, and gave that to them, and was on their I love Captain Saunders list for the rest of the time I never, ever, one, did I ever have to go give them anything else, okay, and two, I could call them up on 2 hours notice and they would get that paperwork done for me. Simply because I went down there and said, you're special, thank you very much for going outside of the normal channels to make this happen. And that was a huge wake-up call. I mean, again, that's not the way operational units work. Okay, although I'm not saying that they shouldn't work that way, but I'm just saying that this, and so there was this, stop, dude, we're all people, and you better start treating people like people, not as subordinates who supposedly work for you. It was, but I will never forget that day, because I really struggled to have to take some, and I mean, come on, this thing cost $3 maybe, who knows, all right, and it's like, why, and did I ever reap the benefits from that? So yeah, that was the beginnings of learning a whole lot of interesting stuff.
And then you said you eventually retired here, right, Pat?
I did.
93.
Yep.
And then what led to that decision?
Well, again, I had aspirations. So I was prior service, and I was non-rated. You know what rated means? Rated or pilots, right? And I was not a pilot. And so there was the chief of staff of the Air Force at the time was General McPeak, and he had in his mind, well, there was, let me just say that the overall mindset of the military was very much focused on pilots and not so much on non-rated people, and definitely not on prior service people, which was sad, but that was kind of the undertone. And it was like, if you were, so from a promotion perspective, prior service and non-rated were semi-black mark. I mean, I don't want to overstate this, but you weren't as competitive as others that weren't prior service, okay? And so, anyway, I looked at all that and the way it had changed, and realized that the goals that I had for what ranks I wanted to achieve in the Air Force were going to be a whole lot more difficult to make based on that new, at least my understanding of the changed mindset at that time frame. And so this opportunity to, when they were letting everybody and their brother out, and they changed the thing from 10-year retirement down to 8-year retirement, which is met exactly what I wanted to do. The fact that I had met all these contractors as I had worked through this joint modeling and simulation system and all that kind of stuff, I had all kinds of contacts to go interview with, and we just made the decision that it was the time to go. It was a tough decision. My wife and I talked about it a lot because we loved the military. We loved not knowing where we were going to be 3 or 4 years down the road. And had you told us then, so as it turns out, when we came back in 1988 to start my master's degree, I mean, we've been in Dayton ever since, okay? And had you told us that at the time, there's no way we would have told you that was the case. And there were lots of other places that we wanted to go. I mean, it was getting harder to go because as the girls got older, moving becomes more and more of a task. But we weren't, my wife and I, neither one were really ready to get out of the Air Force. But it was supposed to be. It was the smartest thing that we did. I mean, I mean, it just worked out the way it was supposed to work out. And I got a great job. And again, I would not have told you that I'd have gone to work for Ball at the time based on all the other relationships that I had. But they made a great offer. They're a great company. And so 20 years and 6 months later, you know, so I spent 20 years there, did a bunch of fun stuff there.
And then now you teach here at Wright State?
And then I started in the spring semester of 14.
Okay.
Yeah, so at the end of 31 December of 2013 is when my official retirement date from Ball was. And yeah, and then I started here to teach.
And then what do you teach here at Wright State?
So I'm on the faculty of the computer science department, so I'm an instructor in computer science, but I'm also the director of our cybersecurity program.
Okay.
So for those who do or don't know, Wright State has a Master of Science degree in cybersecurity. It's the only technical, as in MS, not MA, it's the only technical master's degree in cybersecurity for a non-government organization in the state of Ohio. And the reason I say it that way is because AFIT, which is the Air Force Institute of Technology, it's the graduate school for the Air Force, is over here at Wright Pat, and they also have a master's in cybersecurity. But as far as all civilian institutions, we're the only one who has a master's degree in cybersecurity in the state of Ohio, technical master's degree. And so I was brought on to take that and grow it. And so we have a graduate level certificate. We have an undergraduate certificate in cybersecurity starting in the fall. Well, there's some potential new opportunities that are coming. So because of the work, I had done quite a bit of cybersecurity work when I was at Ball. And so that all played into why I ended up here.
Do you feel like your experience in the Air Force has helped you become a professor and
oh yeah,
teaching?
Tons. Because of, well, I mean, whether it's the Air Force or other business people, but the value, again, all of my experiences, so are real world experiences that you can then use as examples. Okay, that again, faculty who haven't experienced that have to use the examples of others. Okay, and so those experiences, and again, I mean, the military experience for me was amazing, and I would recommend that for lots of for lots and lots of people. But it's not just the military. I mean, I would love to see more and more people that. Again, I call this my retirement job, and it was real interesting. My view of retirement changed based on a discussion we had with friends of ours where we were socializing, and my friend and I, he was a civilian at Wright Pat, I'm a contractor at Ball, and we were both pretty disenfranchised with the way things had changed he had been prior military, he had retired from the military before he became a civilian, and so we were sitting around harumphing about what we didn't like, and we couldn't wait till we were going to retire, and what we were going to do when we retired, and all this kind of stuff. And his wife is a teacher in Xenia, special needs teacher. And so we looked at her and we asked her when was she going to retire. And man, I'll never forget this, and I wish I could draw the picture on her face. She looked at us with this incredulous look on her face, like, what are you talking about? And she said, what? And we said, when are you going to retire? And she goes, the day I die, never. And we looked at her and said, what are you talking about? And she said, I love what I'm doing. Why would I want to retire? And all of a sudden there was this epiphany that said, wait a minute, retirement is not doing anything and playing golf or working in the wood shop or whatever. Retirement, by that definition, is doing something you love to do where making money isn't the primary focus. And so when I say this is my retirement job, I love doing this. Okay, that's why I'm doing this. I want to go, as I say, mess with students' heads. I want you to think. I want you to think outside the box, and because we need this. And the technology, of which I've been helping develop for the last 30 years, is taking some of that away from him, is making it too easy for us to not do that. And so I had a real passion to come back and do that, to teach and to, as I say, mess with students' heads, okay, to get them, because, I mean, especially in the area of cybersecurity, the challenges that we have there are daunting, to say the least. And we need new ways. The ways that we've been doing it in the past are not necessary and sufficient to address these problems. We need people thinking outside the box. And yet, most of us just want to look at these silly phones and wait for it to give us our answer. It's like, stop. So anyway, you're getting me on a soapbox, and I don't want to get on that soapbox. But yes, so this is my retirement job, okay, and I absolutely love it.
So with that said, what message would you like to leave for future generations that might be viewing your interview?
Well, a couple. The military experience, and I've told my wife, if I were ever czar of the world for a day, and actually Germany did this, and so I got this idea from Germany. I would make every high school student serve 2 years in either in a service organization of some type, Peace Corps or something like that, or the military. Okay, for 2 years, not 4. 4 is too long. 2 years. Germany actually did this when theirs was the military, and so when you graduated from what their high school was, you went into the military. Now, again, there were exceptions and all kinds of waivers and stuff, but in any case, and for 2 years, and the reason for this is that the transition from high school to graduating from high school, that's a major transition. And it's the transition, in my mind, of I still have actual responsibility to listen to my parents up through high school. Not that you shouldn't ever stop listening to your parents. One of the most truthful statements of all time is the older I get, the dumber I get, and the smarter my parents get. think about that for a second. But in any case, you need to get, when you graduate from high school, you need to get out and be responsible for your own actions, have enough resources to take care of yourself, not be dependent on somebody else. So enough money, not to be rich by any stretch of the imagination, but to not starve to death. Okay? To have to follow directions and orders, or whatever the tasks may be, and every student every person needs that experience. And then, depending on how well you adapt to that, indicates what you should consider doing next. Okay, but this and one of the reasons that I wanted all of our daughters to go away to college, okay, was and not live at home, was for a similar type thing. It's not. I mean, half of the education you get by going to college has nothing to do with academics. It's living in a dorm, socializing with people, compromising with people, working through fusses with people. I don't like you because you don't put on enough deodorant, or you put on too much deodorant. Just silly things like that that are really important for a foundation on building where you're going to go when you're done. And the military is amazing for that. Now again, 4 years is a pretty big chunk out of somebody's life, but 2 years, no. And so something we need. Well, so the two messages. One, there really needs to be this responsibility test shortly after high school, in this humble person's opinion. The other thing that I think is even more critical than that is, because of all the technology, and the technology is going to keep going, we are still social creatures. We're human beings, and we're social creatures. And we were designed that way. And that's still the way the world turns. Things still get done based on personal relationships. Oh, by the way, a text message is not a personal relationship. An email is not a personal relationship. Okay, Facebook is darn sure not a personal relationship. These are all great technologies. I helped develop the things. Used as tools, the fact that I can look through Facebook and get a pretty good, accurate snapshot of what's going on with all the people that I care about on Facebook is amazing. Okay, I love it. But is that a news source that I'm going to go to get my news? No. But we really, so as we do all this technology and as it continues to explode, this bit about I'll text you rather than come talk to you doesn't work once you get to a certain level. If you want to be successful in business, you want to get somebody to buy your product, you have to go talk to them. You have to go meet them face to face. They have to be able to trust you. Okay? And while there's all kinds of interesting research being done about how I can decide how to trust you based on textual digital information, it's never going to come close to meeting face to face and deciding whether I really trust Jeremy or not. Okay? Do I know, am I going to be 100% right? I don't know. But you got to meet face to face to figure this out. And this technology stuff, we just want to go click and like on things that we don't know anything about. Okay? And it's a real concern of mine as a technologist. Okay? I'm not anti-technology. I'm anti we're not being smart about how we use our technology. And we are, so the message is we are human beings, and we still need to be human beings, and we still need to have personal relationships where we get mad at each other and punch each other in the nose, but where we also hug and kiss and all the things that are necessary, okay? Because that's the way things still get done. The business world isn't going to change over the next several generations, okay, I don't believe, to where that's not going to be the case. Two people are going to come to you with products. I spent the time to establish a relationship with you, and the other person hasn't. His product is actually technically better than mine. 9 times out of 10, you're going to buy mine. Even though it may cost more or be a little less technically capable, you know me and you trust me, you're going to buy mine. Okay? So this bit about best technical and, oh my gosh, mine's the best product out there, how come everybody's not buying it? Did you get off your tail and go out and talk to them and meet them and establish these relationships? And I mean, think about it from relationships with the other sex and going forward and marriage and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Fine, meet online. At some point, you need to get face to face, okay? Well, but this is really fundamental because I see this in the generations that are coming up now. And again, it just drives me absolutely nuts. And I experienced this with my own grandchildren and daughters and everything else, okay? Everything's text, right? Well, if you and I text a message back and forth, like immediate response now. I'm not talking about sending a text and several hours later getting a reply. If I send you a text and you send me one back, I may send you one more. And then I'm going to use this thing called a phone for what it was really intended to be, and I'm going to call you and we're going to talk. Okay? I mean, that's just, anyway. So that's probably, I mean, that's a message that I give to the students. It's okay, I understand, and you have all this technology, and I understand how wonderful it is. But gang, we are still social creatures. And if you lose sight of that, you're going to have some pretty significant struggles going forward. It's convenient to not have to do that. Having relationships with people is risky and painful, but that's the way we were designed. And there's all kinds of information starting to come out about the kids who sit in front of a screen all the time. And it's not encouraging information at all. I mean, yeah, so anyway.
Well, is there anything you'd like to cover that we haven't covered?
No. This has been fun.
Well, I appreciate it, Vance. Thank you for your service, and thank you for the interview.
Thanks.
And this concludes the interview of Vance Saunders.
Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem.